All right. Well, hello, AIM. Week number 2 in our study of the Mama Bear Apologetics book. My name is Pete. Glad to be back with you. And this week we are in chapter 4. So hopefully you had a chance to read it. And I'm going to just cover a brief few points about it and then let you guys dive in and talk about it together at your tables there and hopefully get something out of it. So just to get right into it, not waste any time, Chapter 4 was all about words, and don't worry if you read it and it was a little bit kind of like, it was a pretty, I don't know, the author of Chapter 4 went pretty deep in some areas. So I just want to offer you a little bit about how you can process it and think it through maybe in a way that is really applicable to your lives and raising your kids. So when we talk about words, there's this old saying, I don't know where it came from, but I've heard it quite a few times. Pastor Mariah likes to say it a lot. She likes to say, whoever defines the word wins the argument. Have you ever heard that? Whoever defines the word wins the argument. And essentially what they're saying is when two people are arguing with each other, oftentimes you're arguing about ideas, right? You have a thought, they have a thought. There's something that they think is true, something you think is true, and you're trying to decide who's right and who's wrong. And when we're arguing with each other, when we're talking to each other about ideas, well, all that we have are words. I have my words, you have your words, and we use words. But if I can use a word in a way that helps my argument, it gives me an advantage. If I can change the meaning of a word or change the shift of using of a word, then I'm suddenly I can use it to my advantage when I'm trying to persuade somebody else or argue about something. And so let me give you an example, maybe specifically. It's kind of like this. It's kind of like when you were a kid and maybe you watch your kids, and did you ever find yourself or see one of your kids realize that moment that they just can't win? Like they know, like, I just can't compete here. I'm playing against dad or whatever. My friends are bigger and stronger or smarter or whatever. And so instead of trying harder, they change the rules. Like, actually, no takebacks or 1,000 times infinity. They create rules because they can't feel like they can't win the game. And sometimes when we're arguing with each other or we're talking and debating, when we realize that maybe the argument's not on our side or whatever, or sometimes we do it subconsciously, we can kind of change the rules to our advantage. And we do that by changing the meaning of words or making words mean something else. And where this lands for us, and if that's kind of confusing, it's okay, stick with me. Here's where it lands for us. There are words in our language, in English, and in every language, which everyone agrees on how they make us feel. And just the most basic word I can give you is the word love, and it's used in the book. Everyone I know, and everyone that you know, agrees that love is good. And vice versa, everyone agrees that hate is bad. Love, hate, good, bad. But the problem is, what does love actually mean? So you and I can agree that love is a good thing. But if we don't agree on what the word love means, if we use the word love in our arguments, well, we're kind of talking past each other. And so if I can say that love is definitely a good thing and hate is definitely a bad thing, and you can agree with me, yeah, everyone agrees, right? We all feel that. We all believe that love is good, hate is bad. Then watch what I can do. This decision or this idea is the loving thing to do. Therefore, it's the right thing to do. But that thing or that belief or that idea is hateful, and hate is bad, so that's the wrong thing to do. And everyone's like, well, loving is good and hating is bad, so I guess you win the argument. So, yeah, great. I got love on my side, you're on the side of hate, you lose, I win. But hold on, time out. Who decides what love even means? And who decided that your side is actually a good definition of love? Is what you're arguing for actually the loving thing? Like, have we decided on that idea? Are we sure that the side that this person is on is actually hateful? Because yes, we agree that hate is bad, but hold on, are we sure that's hate? Is that even what the word means in the way they're applying it? And what happens is, oftentimes where this really hits home are in our feelings, right? We feel certain things. And a lot of words have emotion attached to them. Words like love and hate have a lot of emotion attached. I love it. I hate it. Words like tolerance or intolerance, right? Words that speak of what is good and what is bad. They make us feel things. And so if I can make you feel something, then I'm sort of going to persuade you, this is the loving thing to do. Oh, loving is good, so I want it. And what's also hard is because there's oftentimes a lot of emotion attached to words like these, if I can paint my opponent, the person I'm arguing with the bad words, then I can sort of make them the bad person. You become sort of a villain. Well, hate is bad, and your stance is hateful, so you're bad. I don't want to be the villain. Never mind, right? And let's be honest, there are a lot of big ideas that we're arguing about and talking about as Christians, followers of Jesus, that we want our kids to know and train and understand. Things that we're talking about in this book and in this study together that are highly charged and emotional. And oftentimes when we really look at the arguments, we really break them down, what we're often going to find is sometimes we're not even arguing about what is actually true or right. We're actually sometimes arguing with words that don't even mean what they're supposed to mean. Because rather than debating the real issue or talking about what's really at hand, words have been shifted and changed to make people look bad, to win arguments, to make villains of others. And this is a form of arguing that's really just a major problem. It's a fallacy. And part of what we talked about last week is teaching kids to recognize the message, to accept what's good and kick out what's bad. And one of the areas that has to happen is in this area of actually looking at and honestly thinking, wait, hold on, the terms we're using, the words we're using, are we using them correctly? Is this what these words really mean? So when it comes to this idea of apologetics, which this whole class is about, of defending our faith, of teaching our kids to be strong and hold fast to the truth, as they go into the world, and they already are many of them, as you go into the world, what you're finding is you're finding people who want to argue, and they want to argue with their ideas, but oftentimes, instead of actually arguing with the idea, getting to the root of it, what they do is they argue about words, and they change words. And so we have to be ready to say, hold on, I want to make sure I'm at least arguing about the right things. I don't want to surrender ground or give up my beliefs just because you've made me feel bad by switching or twisting a word in a way that it was never meant to understand. So a great place to begin. Last week we talked about critical thinking. This week we're just talking about making sure before we really dive into this stuff, are we understanding the words that we're using and that are often being used against us? Because in the world today, there are a lot of words that have been twisted and misrepresented to speak of Christian beliefs. And in order for us to defend our faith, sometimes it's not even just a matter of defending an idea. It's saying, hold on, that's not what that word means. And we need to make sure we're clear. Now, this is tough, and I won't admit it. It's hard. I never want to sound like this isn't something people know. But I just want you to feel, as you're listening and you're thinking about this, if you're like, oh man, I'm kind of overwhelmed with it, it's okay. And I don't expect you to know the meaning of every word. I don't. I like words, but I just your book does a good job of giving you some really key ones. There's a few that I'm kind of, whatever, but there's some important ones in your book that I just want to touch on and offer some of my own thoughts. And again, you have the book yourself, you can read it. The first one is the one I've mentioned many times, and it's just the word love. The word love in our world today is such a loaded, hot topic kind of word because, again, love is an emotional word. It stirs feelings inside of you. Everybody thinks love is good and wants to be on the side of love. So if I can make love mean what I want it to mean for my side of the argument, if I can be on the side of love, I win, because that means you're on the side of hate. And let's be honest, when it comes to Christianity, the last 20 years, it's really been a battleground about this word. And what we need to know, and we'll just establish, this is problematic right off the bat because the word love is not an emotion. Especially if we're talking about religion, if we're talking about Christianity, which is written in the Greek language in the New Testament, the word love is not a feeling. It's not an emotion. Love, your book, the author described it as desiring or working for the good of another, which I think is a pretty good definition. If you go all the way back to the Hebrew, ahava, love, it means a faithful commitment to lift up another person, to work for their betterment or their good. So it's not about how you feel about someone. It's certainly not how you feel about something, like you love pizza. And I think this is important even as we raise our kids, that we're making sure that we're clarifying when we say love Jesus, we're not talking about feel about Jesus the way that they feel about their toys or their favorite video game. To love Jesus, to love another person, is to put them above, to work for their good, to work for their betterment. To love God is to put him first and foremost in your life, and to love other people is to elevate them and work for their good. So what this creates, though, is this whole interesting conversation. Well, if love is about working for the good of another person and not a feeling, not an emotion, not what makes you feel good, then the real issue with love is simply what is good. If my side is on the side of what is actually good for humans, then the most loving thing to do is to argue for it and to fight for it. If what I'm arguing for and fighting for is not good for humans, is not good for other people, then yeah, I'm not on the side of good. But what is good and who decides it? Now, I'd love to get into that whole thing with you guys, but I've only been given a few minutes for this, so I won't go too deep into that. I will say this, and just so you guys know, I little shameless plug, I actually started a podcast talking about a lot of these issues. It's called Like Stars. You can find it on Apple or any of those places. And my first episode is literally what is good. And I look at this idea of good and bad and evil in the Old Testament, the Garden of Eden, and ultimately how that is often the battleground that we're fighting over. What is actually good? Because yes, I want to be on the side of love, but love is on the side of what is actually good, not on the side of who feels a certain way or what makes you, give you the goosebumps or whatever. So when people accuse me of not being loving or accuse a Christian of not being loving, the response shouldn't be, oh no, I want to be on the side of love. The response should be, to be on the side of love is to be on the side of what is good. And I believe that what is good is what God created and intended for humans to behave. So I'm always going to feel it's the loving thing to do, to argue for God's way above everything else. Does that make sense? So love is not a feeling, it's not an emotion, and we need to make sure that we're understanding the word right. On a similar boat is this other huge buzzword, and I might even be preaching about this weekend. It's this idea of tolerance. And tolerance is just all over the world today, right? Tolerance it's like the biggest buzzword in our culture, and it really hits home among Christians because we're intolerant. But what's important about intolerance is that's another word that has been redefined and twisted in order to win an argument. Because the word tolerate means, and I think your book put it, I wrote it down here, the ability or willingness to tolerate the existence of opinions or behavior that one dislikes or disagrees with. To tolerate someone is to disagree with them and to think they're wrong or to not like what they're doing, but still allow for their existence, to not kill them, right? To not literally war about it. But in our world today, we've taken that word tolerant and we've twisted it to mean if you say anything that I don't like that hurts my feelings, you're being intolerant. But that's not what the word means. So instead of actually arguing about ideas, is what you're arguing for good? Is it the loving thing? It's saying, I don't like how you make me feel when you say that, so you're being intolerant. And as soon as you accuse someone of being intolerant in our world today, immediately the walls come up. That's it. Argument over. You have lost because you're intolerant. Again, what is that? It's changing the meaning of words in order to win an argument rather than actually talking about what's true. And the thing again about intolerance is it comes back to what is good. Because every human being, even the people who scream at the top of their lungs for tolerance, every human being is intolerant of things that they don't think are good. You see someone like, oh, it's all about, they wear t-shirts, they tolerance. And I'm like, do you tolerate pedophiles? Murderers? You don't even tolerate smokers, right? Unless it's like vaping. We don't tolerate things that we think are bad for us. You don't tolerate people kidnapping your children. So what are we actually talking about? We're talking about whether you think something is good or not. If you think something is bad, if you think something is evil, you're not going to tolerate it. You're going to be like, no, forget it. So we just got to tolerate. That's just dumb. It's just, you're twisting a word. Number one, it doesn't even mean that. Tolerate means you can tell me I think you're wrong. It doesn't matter. We'll still live together. What we're talking about is whether or not the wisdom of God, the truth of the message of the Bible and what Jesus taught is actually good for you or not good for you. That's the whole battleground right there. If it's good for you, then you should tolerate it. If it's not good for you, just like anything that's not good for you, we should be intolerant of it. But not in the sense of like intolerant, like I'm not allowing for your existence. Although sometimes that's true. We don't allow for the existence of pedophiles. Sorry to be crass about it, but we don't. We put them in prison. And I'm not comparing people who disagree with me to pedophiles. Please, that's not what I'm saying. I'm making a very extreme case to make an example, which is if you think something is bad or unhealthy or dangerous, you don't tolerate it. And so be careful, and we need to teach our kids even this word not to fall in that trap, because it's like, oh, I don't want to be intolerant. Hold on. We're all intolerant of things that we think are bad or unhealthy or not good for us. The question is whether or not this is actually good and healthy or not. That's, again, the battleground. Another big word is truth. Really the same thing. For most of human history, truth meant an unchanging universal reality that applies to everybody, something that everyone has to acknowledge. That just is. Something is a reflection of reality. But even the word truth has been hijacked. I can't even argue about truth. Instead, it's, well, what's your truth? What's my truth? I'm just living my truth. What does it even mean? It's just nonsense. The best way to win a debate with somebody when you have no good arguments is to just say, well, that's true for you, but not for me. What? I mean, think about it when you're in school. Think about how great that would be if every time you took a test and you couldn't remember the answer, or you couldn't figure it out, you just said, well, your answer's true for you, but not for me. That's really what we've done. We've taken the word truth and just thrown it out the window and said, well, whatever's true, however you feel. We brought it all down to feelings. So the question is not whether or not something is or isn't actually good or bad for you. The question has become, how do you feel about it? What's true for you? Do you think, and even what is good and bad? What is good for you? What is bad for you? Oh, whatever you feel. Like, there's no universal truth of what is good. We can't universally say that. So whatever you feel, right? You heard that before? Well, I mean, if that's not a problematic statement, I don't know what is. If a person says that to me and they say, well, there's no actual truth, it's just whatever you feel. Well, then I say, well, I feel you're wrong. Does that mean you're wrong? So aren't I free to say I think you're wrong and try to stop you since it's whatever I feel? The whole argument implodes on itself. If we're not building things on things that are real, truth, and that's really what happened. It's the world we currently live in. And we're going to come back to that a little bit in a future chapter that talks a bit about the postmodern movement and truth. But I just want to sort of set that. So love, truth, tolerance. Your book covers other words like bigot. Oh, you're a bigot because I disagree with you. What? You're not a bigot if you think something's unhealthy. We're twisting words. Justice and equality, which is such a hot button issue. Don't know if I want to cover that one as much. I don't know how strong of an opinion I have with the book on that. I'm kind of in the middle of it. I do think it's important that justice and equality are part of a healthy society, but I also think sometimes those words are hijacked a bit to make mean other things. Even Christianity, words like grace and faith and other words. What do these words mean? It's important that we have a good grasp of them. Again, if you want to know more on this, these are a lot of the kind of topics that I'm covering in my podcast. What does the word grace mean? What does the word faith mean? I'm going to talk about some of these deeper. So if you want to check out the podcast, likestars.com it's not likestars.com. Why did I just say that? It's the Like Stars, the podcast. And we're going to be covering some of that. So feel free to check it out if you want more on it. But I think where we're going with this book is so healthy and important, that we're teaching our kids to think critically, and we're also teaching them to recognize words that aren't being used the right way. And so just some of the takeaways, again, your book talks about teaching kids what these words actually mean. I actually do that with my kids. I do find myself correcting my kids when they say that. I say, guys, that's not what the word love means. That's a big one. I'm trying really hard to get them to be rooted in what the word love actually means. And then to identify when a word's not being used correctly. That's not what that word means. Hold on a second. And learning to identify also when emotion is at play. It's such it's understandable, but it's such a devious tactic of the devil, I think, sometimes, whereby, and I don't want to say of people because, whatever, but sometimes with people, I don't want to have a better idea. I don't want to be actually right or true. I'm not. So what I'll do is I'll do something that makes you feel stupid or embarrassed. I'll try to shame you in public rather than actually have a better idea than you. And that's on either side. If a Christian does that, that's bad. If the truth of the Bible is real, we shouldn't need to shame people and make them feel dumb or stupid or bad. We should be able to present the truth of God's wisdom, and here it is. And I think that's what I want to do, and I hope that's what you do with your family. But I also want my kids, and I want you and your family to be able to recognize when someone's doing it to you. Oh, you're intolerant, you're not loving, you're hateful, you're a bigot, all these kind of things. It's like, first of all, those aren't what those words even mean. You're misapplying them. And second of all, I'm not going to bow to this pressure you're creating and try to make me feel like a bad person when I believe the word of God tells me what is good, and that's what I'm building my life on. So it's a lot. It's heavy, I know, but it's worth fighting for. So hope that helps. Really take some time in your table discussions to walk through it and talk about it. If you have any other questions, you can always email me, Pete@risecitychurch.com. And again, there's a lot more information about this kind of stuff through the Digging Deeper podcast our church does, through my podcast like Stars, and just even other books or resources that will help you out however I can. So reach out to me if you'd like to know more about it. But in the meantime, hope you have a great week, a great discussion, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, guys.